Hey, this is Nachliel Selavan, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Torah Intermedia. Before you go on to watch the video of this virtual tour presentation or whatever it is, I just want to ask you to support this channel and to please click the red subscribe button on the bottom there, and if you can also click the notification. And that way, if you like this video, you'll be able to get notifications whenever I post a new video, and I'm trying to post them more and more. If you like, even leave a comment. I'd really appreciate it. And now, without further ado, let's enjoy the show.
So right now, first of all, I'm just sharing you an image of a school from New Jersey, which I took to the Met this year, about 43 students in the museum, and we took this picture. And I'm quoting here the pasuk, which is really the Mishnah, which is going to be our introduction, which is B'chol dor vador chayav adam lir'ot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. That is to say that we need to see ourselves as if we left Egypt. And what I mean by that, and why we're doing this tour, is so we don't imagine ourselves as if we're in Prince of Egypt living thousands of years ago, but rather we need to somehow understand how Mitzrayim could be a real idea today in 2020, and to think about how we can look at ourselves as if we are under those kinds of powers and to seek our freedom. So in order to do that, of course, we're going to go into the museum. And before we go into the museum, I would like to briefly introduce us to the most important thing about Mitzrayim, Egypt, and what makes it such a powerful country throughout most of human history, and why it was so important for us to seek freedom when we were in that environment. So this Google Earth image shows us Egypt the way we look at it. In other words, we're looking towards the north. You can see Eretz Israel. If you look very carefully, you'll see the Dead Sea. It's too hard to see the Kinneret at this point. But you can see Yam Suf, the Red Sea, and you see the Sinai, which is that big triangle in the center. That's the Sinai Desert. And to the left, we have the Nile River, which is the most important landmark about Egypt. It's what gave them their economic power, their ability to grow a lot of grain, and it gave them the power to rule throughout a large part of the world for many thousands of years, because they had this power of creating an economy which has grain, which can therefore have a lot of power, and it's also, they had a powerful army. So we're looking at Egypt. And in order to understand Mitzrayim, when we're going to go into the museum and look at some stuff, we need to understand two things about Egypt. Okay, we can skip this pasuk right now. We need to understand that the most important landmark in Egypt is the Nile, and the most important person in Egypt is Paro, the Pharaoh. And I'd like to show you how the two are connected. So you're looking at this image. This is an image of Paro standing on the Nile from his dream with the story of Yosef. This is my own painting, but that little GIF, I took it off the internet. And this is Paro as we're used to looking at him, with his menace hat, which is a kind of crown of Egypt. And this is Egypt as we look at it. But I would like to take you into the mindset of the Egyptians and how they looked at the world. So take a look at the map and what's going to happen to it. And you see that what I did is I flipped it, so to speak, upside down. But that's because we look at the world upside down. And the Egyptians actually looked at it this way, because the Nile is what gave them life. And the Nile is what they were dependent on. And the Nile came from Central Africa and flowed up towards the north and poured into the Mediterranean Sea. So for the Egyptians, the Nile came from where that was up. And what we look at as north for them was down. And now, not only that, but Egypt historically was divided into two countries. And one of them was called Upper Egypt. And they had a special crown for the kings who ruled in Upper Egypt. And this is what their crown looked like. It's on the map. And the kings which ruled in Lower Egypt had a different crown, which is the crown of Lower Egypt. In Egyptian history, the first pharaoh was the pharaoh that united Upper and Lower Egypt, who ruled the two lands and combined them to become the ruler of the entire Nile Valley. And this is what's called the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. And this is indeed what the pharaohs would wear when they ruled over both lands. So that's important to understand. And I'm going to take you now into the museum. But what I'd like you to understand is that for Egyptians, the pharaoh is the power that controlled all of the Nile. And the Nile is what gave Egypt their life. So everyone, in order to have water and life, they believe that they have to serve the pharaoh, Paro, and that he is like a god who gives them the power to live. So that was a very important part of Egypt. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you another screen, which I'm going to take you into Google Street View and take you into the museum. So I was just playing around with this a little bit. I'm going to take you to the entrance of the museum, and we're going to enter ancient Egypt right there. Okay, we are on floor 2. Let's move to floor 1. Here we are, perfect. We are inside the entrance to the Egyptian galleries. Let's look around a little bit, shall we? Here we are in the ancient Egyptian galleries. I hope you don't get dizzy. I'm going to try to move a little slower. So this is what you see when you walk into the Metropolitan Museum. That person is right now about to walk out of the Egyptian galleries. And this is a tomb, the tomb of an official whose name is Peri-Nebi. And all of this wall that you see here, except for the walls on the outside, are original stones from Egypt, which were shipped into America. And it's the only temple, the only tomb outside of Egypt. And you can walk inside and visit it, but the street view doesn't go inside there. Now, our first stop is going to be about mummies, because mummies tell us a lot about Egyptian belief, about their gods, about the underworld, which is their idea of what happens after you die. And we're going to go into their mythology and their creatures. And mummification is really cool. So I want to take you through different kinds of mummies. This mummy is actually Roman, because when the Romans conquered Egypt, they were fascinated by the Egyptian mummification and their beliefs, and so they would mummify their own dead. So this is a mummy of a Roman person who lived in Egypt. And there's a whole lot of those. Now this is footage from the Met from 2010. This is from 10 years ago. So things look a little bit different today. But we're going to move through. Here's another mummy of somebody from the time of the second Bet HaMikdash. This is great. So this is the Facsimile Hall. These are all copies of paintings that are inside the tombs of pharaohs and other kinds of officials. And it shows you what they did in daily life. You see these people who have fish, and they're fishing, they're working in the field with the papyrus plant, which is what they made paper out of. It's called papyrus, right? You can see on the bottom that they're growing grapes, and they're stepping into a wine press with their feet. That's why it's called a wine press. They press it with their feet and make wine. So that's kind of cool. And I'm going to take you to a mummy now, which I have a family connection to. Believe it or not, I really have a family connection to one of the mummies at the Metropolitan Museum. Okay, so let's go and see him. On our way to this mummy, this long stretch of papyrus across the whole wall is called the Book of the Dead. And we are going to go and look at it. I'm sure if you're learning about ancient Egypt, you may have heard about the Book of the Dead. It's very, very important, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. Before we do, here is a mummy that I'd like to introduce you to. Let me see if I can get closer. Let's look down. Try to look at his face. Okay. This mummy over here, the lighting isn't so good. This mummy's name is Nesmin. And Nesmin was a Greek official. He was a Greek who lived in Egypt and was basically an Egyptian. And they mummified him after he died. And there's a few important things about this mummy. Oh, we just walked through a wall. This over here, this dog is called Anubis, and we're going to talk about him a lot in just a bit. But this is a mummy that I have a family connection to. So I'm going to explain that to you. This mummy was from almost 2,100 years ago. And we know everything about him, about what he looks like, what his bones look like, even how well he brushed his teeth. We know tons of stuff about him, but he's never been opened. He's never been unwrapped. The reason for that is because if you unwrap the mummy, then the skin, which is already preserved, is exposed to the oxygen and it damages the skin. That's what happened to King Tut and to other kings whose mummy was opened up. But today with modern technology, we don't have to open him up. You can slide him into an MRI tube and have him scanned, and then in 3 dimensions, you can remove all the linens and all the little amulets that are wrapped inside him for protection, these little clay figures of eyes and figures and stuff like that. And you can see them in the Met. You can see pictures of what it looks like when they scanned him. And you can even see his skin, and you can even, with the computer, remove the skin and look at the skeleton and see what was the cause of death. You can do like CSI forensics on these and learn a lot about them. Some mummies were found to have been injured in battle by arrows or stabbed in the back with a knife. And you can find that out by scanning them. And my family connection to this mummy is that my cousin, Dr. Hoffman, was the radiologist who did this, who scanned this mummy with his team of radiologists at NYU. So that's my family connection to this mummy. Now let's going to move on. We're going to go into mummies. You see all these stone cases of mummies and boxes and sarcophagi. So we're going to go and take a closer look at how the Egyptians buried their dead and what that can teach us about the 10 Makot. So let's move ahead. Look at this guy's big nose. This mummy is actually a sarcophagus for two. There's a couple that was inside that. So it's a kind of a romantic wish for your death anniversary, I guess they would call it. I don't know. All right, let's go into this room. Here we are. This room is all about mummies. We're going to see a lot of fun stuff in here. But let's start with this guy. Let's move a little bit to the side, a little bit. Okay. So you know those Russian dolls where there's a doll inside a doll inside a doll? They're called matrushkas, which means grandma. So it's like grandmother. There's a doll inside a doll inside a doll, and that's how the Egyptians would bury their dead. What we're looking at right now, you have to imagine it being like opened up and sort of floating in the air because it would all be closed. At the very inside, you have a wooden sarcophagus, and inside it would be the wrapped mummy. And I'm soon going to show you a real mummy. It's not real live because it's a dead, but a real mummy inside the Met, which is right behind where we're standing. Now, the mummy would be the body, in order to preserve the body, and I'm going to explain in a moment why we do that. I'm sure if you learned about Egypt, you know about this. They needed to preserve the body so it wouldn't rot, so that the body can last forever. And in order to make the body last forever, they needed to dry it out because the liquids in the body, the moist, would make it rot. So they dried out the body for like 40 or 70 days. And they would take out some of the internal organs. They even took out the brain through the nose. They kind of thought that the brain was a useless piece of meat, which catches up space. It was a no-brainer. And they would wrap it up with linens and dry it. And then they would put the body inside of one case, and then another case, and then another case. So you're seeing 3 different cases here. And sometimes the case was wood, sometimes the case was stone. It depended how much money you had. It was only the rich who were really able to be mummified. Everyone else was buried regularly. So now let's take a look at some stuff. So people bury themselves with all of their belongings. Like imagine your PlayStation or your Xbox and your toys and everything that you can, they would bury with the dead. So we're looking here even at the person's pet. The light's a little bit bright, but this is a pet, which was dried out and mummified and buried. So imagine your pet dog or your pet cat being dried out and mummified and put inside with your tomb so that you can kind of play with your pet in the afterlife, which is kind of weird, but that's what they believe. There's also all kinds. This is a dress with beads. So this was a lady. There you go. You see the long hair. That's a lady. And here's an actual mummy. This mummy is a mummy of some woman who is about 5'2" or 5'3" feet high. I actually laid down next to her so you can see it. Now, the Egyptians really wanted to preserve the body and protect it. And in order to protect it, they had all these different sarcophagi. And that actually helped this mummy because look at this outer one. It's all black and burned. It's like it probably caught fire somehow and was burned. But because there's several different layers, the body is still preserved thousands of years later. And there it is. And this is from the time of the first Bet HaMikdash, the first temple. So you're looking at a case inside a case inside a case with the mummy inside. So it was really protected, right? Now let's talk about why they did this. Let's move around. We'll see some more stuff. More and more of them. Look at that. Little prayer amulets that people would use. Oh, we just walked through a wall. How did that happen? We just walked through a wall. I'm going to have to get back in there. These kind of things happen in ancient Egypt. You get sucked into a wall, and then you never know how to get out of there. I think we were somewhere around there. Is that it? It's a good thing to know the museum. No, I'm on the wrong side of the museum. All right. Soon to be corrected. Here we go. Boom. All right, perfect. Here we are. So we're back in this room, and I'm going to take you up close to the Book of the Dead, and we're going to examine a very important part of it. So before I do that, I'm going to introduce something really important. Why did the Egyptians want to preserve the body? What's the big deal about this? So I'm sure some of you know this, I'm kind of reviewing. The Egyptians believe that after the soul, the spirit, after the body dies, the spirit can live forever. But in order for it to live forever, you have to preserve the body. The body has to last. And if the body doesn't last, then the spirit can't connect to it. And therefore you can't communicate with the dead and they can't move around and get instructions and basically do what they wanted to do when they're alive. So if you manage to mummify the body and preserve it, then the dead would be able to keep on coming in and visiting and hearing what's going on. And finally, it would be able to live forever and go into the underworld, which is their idea of what happens after you die. But in order to get into the underworld, well, it's very complicated. I like to say that for Am Yisrael, for the Jews, we need to do a lot of work in this world to get to Olam Haba. For the Egyptians, most of the work is done after you die. So there's this instruction manual called the Book of the Dead, and I'm going to zoom in by sharing my screen into the picture of the Book of the Dead that we are now looking at. Here we are. Before we do, I'm going to introduce a few characters. The four important characters that we need to know about when we talk about the Book of the Dead. So first of all, in order to get into the underworld, you need to, of course, be judged by the king of the underworld, who's known as Osiris. And it's therefore that part of the Book of the Dead with instructions for the dead is called the Judgment of Osiris. And this is what Osiris looks like in Egyptian mythology. You'll see that he's green. That's because he's dead. So he's the ruler of the underworld. And the person who does the judgment is the god of the dead, not the king of the underworld, but the god of the dead. And that is Anubis. Anubis is like a jackal, like a wild dog. And that's because for the Egyptians, the whole idea of Egyptian mythology is that they're trying to understand the world. And they look at forces of nature and they try to give them a picture, a figure, an idea that they can relate to. So dogs are the creatures which are always related to death all the time. There's dogs at the outside of the city. There's dogs in the battlefield. So for the Egyptians, the god of death is going to be Anubis. And before we go into the judgment of Osiris, I would like to introduce to you one example of how we talk about Anubis in the 10 Makot, in the 10 plagues. So during Makat Bechorot, we have a reference to the dog in a very, very strange way, in which when all of the Bechorot, the firstborn, are dying in Egypt, Hashem says to Moshe, to say to Paro, that lechol b'nei Yisrael lo yecheratz kelev leshono lemeish v'ad behema, that not a single dog will make a sound to all of Am Yisrael, whether it's an animal or a man, in order that leman ted'un asher yafle Hashem ben Mitzrayim u'ben Yisrael, in order that you know that Hashem makes the distinction between Egypt and Israel. And now what does that even mean? We have to understand that when Hashem is trying to teach the Egyptians who really runs the world, you need to show them that their gods aren't the real explanation for the world. And that's a very hard thing to do because people like what they believe in and they don't want to learn so easily, right? So every single one of the Makot deals with different ones of the gods of Egypt. As Hashem says, B'chol Elohei Mitzrayim e'aseh shvatim, I'm going to judge all of the gods of Egypt, and that's how they're going to know that Hashem runs the world and not their gods. So in Makat Bechorot, the dogs are so quiet that the Egyptians have to understand that Anubis has no control over who lives and who dies, because if he would, dogs would be partying, would be howling, would be making noise. And because they're quiet, everybody knows that. So now let's go into this papyrus, which is exactly where we're standing in the museum. We're actually standing right in front of this papyrus. So look to the right. This is Osiris. He's wearing the crown. You remember that crown of Upper Egypt? So that's like a crown of, in this case, he's like a pharaoh. He's like the ruler of the world of the dead, of the underworld. And this is the Book of the Dead of a woman. So probably one of the mummified women that we saw next to us. So you see the woman in many different places. This is a papyrus telling this woman what she needs to do to get to the underworld. You have to talk to these demons and remember their name and say, I solemnly swear I am up to no good. Actually, the opposite. You would have to say that I did not steal and I did not murder and I was righteous, okay? And the most important part of the judgment of Osiris is called the weighing of the heart. And that has to do, again, with Anubis. Look at him. He's right there underneath the scale. Now, this scale has two sides on it, of course. On the left-hand side is the heart of this woman, which is inside a jar, because you need to weigh the heart. And if you don't put it in a jar, it's going to slip and fall, right? So they put it in a jar. On the right-hand side, you have a little figure with a feather on its head. And that is the goddess of balance and order and justice. And I'm going to introduce you to her in just a minute. But that means that the heart has to be righteous, has to be tzaddik. And if your heart is too heavy, well, guess what happens? there's a monster that's going to eat up your heart, and I'm going to introduce that to you. But now when we talk about the weighing of the heart, and for the ancient Egyptians, when you say to a person, your heart is heavy, that means you are evil. And so when Hashem is telling to Moshe that Paro's heart is going to be heavy, that means in Egypt that it's going to be, that he's evil. And that his heart, if he's too heavy, you can kind of get eaten up by a monster and, you know, you don't go to the afterlife. So it's a kind of language, it's a phrase, it's a sentence that makes sense to Egyptians. And Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, grew up in the palace. He knew this stuff. So the weighing of the heart, I'm going to introduce you to one more character here, and that's that monster that's next to Anubis. And he, in different Book of the Dead, he's in different places. So this picture just helps us see it. So you see there's the heart, there's the scale, there's a feather on one side and a jar with the heart on the other side. And if you don't weigh the right way, if your heart is too heavy, your heart gets eaten up by this monster and you don't make it to live in the kingdom of Osiris. So really, really briefly, I want to introduce you to these three characters, and we're going to move on to our next station. So we have Anubis on the top. We have the heaviness of the heart. And to the right here is the goddess Ma'at, with the feather on her head. And I want to explain the feather. I'm sure you all have seen ostriches before, right? An ostrich is a very big bird. And one second, I see we have a question. The ostrich's feather is huge. And if you want to balance that feather on the tip so it never falls, that's pretty much impossible to do, right? And so the symbol for Egyptians of the goddess who's responsible for balance and order is an ostrich's feather, which is balanced on its tip. And that's the hieroglyph that you see on the bottom right. So you weigh the heart against balance and order in order to show if the heart is just or not. And finally, that monster which eats up the heart. So what is the plague of Arov? Mixed animals. It can mean two things. It can mean a mixture of many different kinds of animals, but it can also mean an animal that is a mixture of other animals. This is, of course, we don't really know, but it's possible. So it's kind of cool. I would like to introduce you to this little character. His name is Amot, and he is a combination of the three biggest human-killing animals in all of Egypt. You surely recognize his face, right? That's a crocodile. His forebody is the lion, and the back is a hippo. And a hippopotamus can snap a person in half. They're big and dangerous monsters and some of the biggest killers in Egypt. So these are the three human-killing animals, and this monster is an arov, it's an irbuvia, it's a mixture of different animals, and it is possible that if this was the plague of arov, we don't really know, but if it is, then it's like the boogie monster from the Egyptian, tales. So that's kind of fun. Now I'm going to share with you, we're going to go back into the museum, and we're going to explore a little bit more. So now we've seen that, okay? I saw somebody raise their hand. I'm going to see, I can't really unmute him, so.
Charlie Aaron, so would you like me to unmute him?
Yeah, if he has a question.
What would they put on the other side of the scale while they were weighing the heart?
They would put a feather, but it's not a regular feather. It's a feather of justice. And in order for the heart to be considered a tzaddik, a righteous person, and to go and live in the afterlife, you need to be weighed against the feather of justice, which is also called Ma'at, which is the goddess of justice and cosmic order. So it's kind of a symbol for order. So you have to be weighed against order and justice, okay? And then you say, I never stole, and I never killed, and so on, okay? Now, I'm going to move us out of this world of the dead, and I want to take you quickly into, we have like 5 to 10 more minutes, so I'm going to wrap up very soon. I want to take you into the Temple of Dendur, which is one of the coolest things about the museum. Here it is, the Temple of Dendur. Now, you don't get to see it so empty on a regular day. It's usually full of people. And this is a picture from 2010. So a few things have changed about it, but it's pretty much the same today. Okay, trying to move a little bit further. We don't have that much time to go in, but I want to show it to you from closer up. So this is a real Egyptian temple, which was brought stone by stone on a ship into the United States about 50 or 60 years ago. And it's actually built into Central Park. It's part of Central Park, but there's a protective glass here, which the light is kind of blinding us. It's a little bit hard to see. But the reason for that is that it doesn't get damaged by the weather. Now, this temple is actually kind of a fake temple. And when I say fake, it's because it was really built for a Roman emperor who ruled over Egypt. And that is Emperor Augustus, who has the month of August named after him, because I think it was his step grandfather or uncle who was Julius Caesar. I think it's his uncle, Julius Caesar, who gave the month of July. And so Roman emperors kind of wanted months to be named after them. So Julius Caesar is July and Augustus is August. And this is a temple that was built by the Egyptians to honor him so that they show that they're loyal to him. And it was flooded by water because 60 years ago, the Egyptian government built a dam in Aswan, which is really in the south of Egypt or Upper Egypt. And that was flooded with water, so it needed to be saved. And America, the United States, was part of a UNESCO project that rescued it and saved it. And the Egyptian government was appreciative and thanked America by giving it to us and letting us put it in the museum. So it's a really cool temple that we can see. Now, there's usually a crocodile in the Nile over here. This is showing you how it was in Egypt. It was really right outside the Nile. Not a real crocodile, it's a stone crocodile. Okay. Now I'm going to take us to one more place. It's going to be a little bit hard to get there if we drag us there. So I'm going to drop us into that place. And that's going to be our last stop. Let's see if I can remember. We're standing here. It should be somewhere over here. Almost. 1 second. I think this is it. Is this it? No, it's not. A moment. Well, it's close enough. Okay. And what's really cool about this place is you see the entrance to a massive palace. This is really cool. These things make you feel really, really small. And look, that's like Osiris, the world of the king of the underworld. You're kind of seeing a character you know. Okay, the place we're looking for is right here. Looks like I'm stuck in a 3D thing, in a 360 instead of in the street view. Hold on. Is this it? Nope. This is it. Perfect. Exactly where I want to be. Now this, guys, this is going to be our last stop, and it's going to be where we talk about chametz and matzah. But this is a really, really cool place. So the color isn't so good here because the technology from 10 years ago of Google's Street View wasn't as good as it is now. I actually wrote to the Met today saying, hey guys, why don't you do it now that the museum's empty? Like, redo it. Now, this is from the time of the Old Kingdom. This is from the time of the pyramids. It's almost 4,000 years old. And what you need to know, and you're going to see some really cool stuff, is that the Egyptians buried in their tombs all of these mini wooden models of daily life, of stuff that they would do in their life. And I'm going to show this to you on the slideshow, like in full color. And this is what they believed would allow the body and the mummy to keep on doing what it did when it was alive. So if it had boats, then you would have a boat and you'd be able to keep on doing the same thing you did in the afterlife. Now, this was discovered by accident by a team of researchers from the Met 100 years ago exactly, from 1920, in a place called the Valley of the Kings, which is a valley that had a lot of different tombs of kings. And because the kings buried themselves with all kinds of good stuff like gold and silver, jewelry, so thieves would raid these tombs and try to rob them. So you have grave robbers who knew they would get really rich. So you all know about King Tut, right? Tutankhamun. The reason King Tut is so famous is not because he was a popular king. The Egyptians hated him. But the reason he's famous is because Carter found him and he wasn't found by thieves. So we have all of this cool stuff. This is an example of, this guy wasn't a king, he was an official, but all of this stuff was found. I'm trying to get an angle on the picture of what it looked like when they found this door by accident and found all this cool stuff. Okay, this is not working. I'm gonna share the slideshow so that you can see all this stuff. Here we go. I'm gonna share the slideshow and that's gonna really be our last part. Let's go. Here we go. So this is the models that we're standing in front of. You see that there's cows. They ate a lot of cows for meat. On the right-hand side, these are original models, by the way. You can probably lift them up in 2 hands, but these are real original Egyptian wood and paint and everything. This shows us people making bread and beer, which is really important. Now, these pictures, you don't have to worry too much about the Pesukim right now, I'm not going to cram them in such a short time. But these are pictures of Egyptians making bread. You can see that there's a woman there with a grindstone, and there's they're making dough and all kinds of shapes for bread, and they're making beer as well. This is a close-up of the people on the grindstone. So there's an expression that's called the daily grind. And that's because you would grind the grains every single day to make flour and have fresh bread, of course, because you're not going to buy the preservative stuff at ShopRite, right? You want the real good stuff. So, so this is Egyptians. Now, there's a person by the oven, and these guys are making beer. And here's where I'd like to really wrap it all together. That's one of those boats. You see what their boats look like. And I want to wrap it all together with this conversation. The one thing that we are told in the Torah that Hashem tells us not to do on Pesach is not to eat seor and chametz, not to eat bread that's fermented, leavened bread, and not to eat anything that's like made from grain which rises, which also includes beer, for example, right? Beer and bread. Now, there's one thing which made Egypt very special, which is an invention that Egypt invented for the world, and that is bread. Egypt invented bread. And if you think about how that is, it's because Egypt is a society that is settled on the Nile and doesn't go anywhere. And so you can let the dough rise and then you can put it in the oven. But if you don't live in Egypt, you're nomadic, you're traveling, you're always on the move. And you know how to make bread on the move. You make a pita, you make matzah, you make a pita bread. So you make a soft bread. That's how you make bread when you're a nomad, when you travel. And that's not how you do things in Egypt. But if you're traveling, you don't have an oven, you can't make bread. Egypt's food sits there and rises, whereas matzah is about nomadic, about movement, about travel. And this is the major difference between Pesach, Mitzrayim, and matzot, is that in Egypt, between the Egypt food and Pesach food. Egypt food is, we're sitting here, we don't need to go anywhere, it's all good, you don't have to think about it. Paro is taking care of everything, just serve him and everything will be good. That's basically being a slave to Paro. But the bread of Pesach, matzah, means travel, means move, means you have to make choices. You can't just settle and everything's fine. You need to figure things out, you gotta move, you can't rest. And so the idea of Pesach is to go back to being involved in movement and freedom instead of just being stuck in your place. And so that's the food of Egypt. And so that's really where I'm going to end, where we see, and then we're going to ask, if we have some questions, but that's pretty much where we're at, where we see the land of Egypt, the Nile, Paro, it was all ruled by one person and everybody was slaves to Paro. And that the bread of Egypt, which Egypt invented, which is bread, is the thing we need to get away from on the holiday, on the Chag, where we want to be free and we want to be involved in movement and choice. So I'm going to end here. I'm going to say Chag Sameach and Shabbat Shalom, and I'm open for questions, of course.
Okay, so I think I saw Jake Braverman, you had a question? Jake, I unmuted you.
Can you send me the link for that virtual tour? I want to see it. Like, I want to explore more of it.
So what you do is you go to Google Maps and you just type in the Metropolitan Museum of Art or the Met. And then when you're there, you go on to Street View. Do you know how to use Street View?
No.
So on the bottom right, there's a figure of a little yellow person. You basically drag that person and drop them where you want to go.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, and you'll figure it out from there. There's also, sometimes you're on the first, second, or third floor of the basement. You need to see on the bottom right, there's controls of what floor to be on if there are more than one floor.
Okay,
Have fun. Have fun. Yes.
Kate Sabag. Kate, I unmuted you.
Hi. So, how did you find out like which mummy is which?
I've been to the museum hundreds of times, so I've studied this. I've sat there for hours and read about it and looked it up, and every artifact in the museum has a number that you can put inside the Met's app or their website and research it and learn about it. So I spent years learning about this and many hours studying this museum. And the Met's website has a lot of good information. A lot of the pictures you can get for free, really high quality pictures off the metmuseum.org, off the Met. And you can Google that and find it. They have a lot of great pictures and information.
Okay, that's beautiful. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Maya Amar, did Maya just raise her hand or no? She put it down? Oh, Rabbi Knapp. Rabbi Knapp, did you want to say something?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that's a silent K.
Oh, no problem. Rabbi Nachliel not unmuting. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes.
Here we go.
Nachliel, I missed the introduction. I apologize. How did you get into this this study, this field? Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into this?
Oh,
Fascinating.
in a 30-minute presentation, I really didn't talk too much about myself. I just hope people enjoyed the experience, and you can always just Google my name or find out about me, or I'll send information. I'm from the old city. I grew up in the Rova with archaeology and history. My father's a tour guide and an archaeologist and a rabbi. So I kind of got that combination. And I've been teaching in the States for 7 years. I've been at Barkai, I've been in a Montessori school. I'm currently at Magen David. So I'm always like involved in, teaching about this stuff. And I've been developing tours in the Met and other museums around the world in the last 4 years. So I've just turned this into something that I like to share with people in Jewish communities.
So you teach remotely at Magen David from Yerushalayim?
No. I was in New York last week. I escaped in time.
You live in New York now.
Yeah, I mean, I was planning on moving back to Israel in July at the end of the school year, but at the current situation, it's all virtual. So I took my chances and came here, and we'll see what happens, Bezrat Hashem, in May.
Okay, Nia Bekeshe.
Bezrat Hashem.
Thank you. I think a lot of the students that are on is my next class. So
Okay, so please make sure it's recorded. We'll be in touch.
I did.
And wonderful. And if you always want to find out more, you can always find me, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever. I also have TikTok, Instagram. I'm sure the students like that. They'll figure out how to find me.
Beautiful.
I post about this stuff. All right. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's almost Shabbat. I gotta go.
Thank you.
Okay.